and I'm here at Raleigh Little Theater on the set of Measure for Measure, which I'm really excited about, and I'm speaking with Rebecca Blum, the director of this production. So thank you for taking time to sit and speak with me.
Oh gosh, thanks for having me.
Because Measure for Measure is probably not one of the better known Shakespeare plays, can you kind of give me a brief synopsis, Cliff Notes version of what this play is about?
Sure, I'll do my best. So the play is set in Vienna, which isn't really an important detail in this particular production, but the Duke is very unhappy with the way the people in his city are carrying out their lives. There's a debauchery, and he just feels like a general degradation in moral values. And part of that is because he has been lax in enforcing these laws for 19 years. So he looks out the window and he sees the city run amok. And he wants these laws to be enforced, but he doesn't want to be the one to do it. So he calls in a man named Angelo, who is professed to be very straight-laced, and he's religious, and the Duke thinks, if I put him in charge, he will then enforce this, clean up the town, and I won't be, well, I guess, the bad guy. So he puts Angelo in his place, and then the Duke leaves, but he doesn't actually leave. He just goes over and throws on a monk's robe so that he can stick around and see how things are going in disguise. Angelo immediately starts enforcing these very old laws. The first one that he enforces is a penalty for fornication, and the penalty is death, actually. So he goes out immediately and has a young man named Claudio arrested. Claudio has gotten his fiancée pregnant. Claudio, desperate to try to save his life, has a friend of his reach out to Isabella, Claudio's sister, who wants nothing more than to be a nun. Okay? So Isabella goes to Angelo. I know there's a lot of names. Isabella goes to Angelo to plead for her brother's life, and she's very smart, so she's able to debate with him with a kind of reason that he's not prepared for, and a religious logic as well, which really kind of catches him off guard. He finds himself really attracted to her, so much so that he proposes to her and he gives her an ultimatum. You sleep with me and I'll let your brother live. If not, then your brother dies, as an example to everyone else. So Isabella then finds herself at a crossroads, and I'll leave it there. but that's the crux.
Well, and this historically has been referred to as a problem play. Talk about that a little bit. Why is this a problem play?
Well, Lauren, I'm not a scholar, so I'm the wrong person to have that kind of in-depth scholarly analysis with. But from my perspective, the reason that it's a problem play, for me as a director, there were a lot of questions, a lot of things that Shakespeare did in the text and the writing that were problems that I had to try to figure out. Because if the audience is really paying attention, they would be confusing to them. They were confusing to me. So I figured out ways to try to kind of explain those unanswered questions, if you will. But really, when people talk about a problem play for this production, it's you can kind of trace it back to Shakespeare having tragedies and comedies. In tragedies, at the end of the play, there's a pile of dead bodies. In comedies, at the end, you have a wedding or sometimes multiple weddings, okay? And what's really complicated about this play is that it is about half and half comedy and tragedy. There's some really funny stuff that happens in this play, and there's some really not funny stuff that happens in this play. And so the marriage of the two, back to marriage, it's just a tricky line to walk, right? But really what I think puts this in the category of problem plays is that at the end of this show, there are potentially 3 weddings, 3 couples that are married, and I'm not sure any of the 3 of them are actually happy about being married. So while it has that sort of structural ending of a comedy, it's not necessarily funny, I think.
Right. And I guess in speaking about the ending, and I don't want to give too much away, but I do want to ask you about kind of the extended ending that
Sure.
you kind of try to, where Shakespeare kind of left it open to interpretation. You've
Yeah.
given us kind of an extended, very contemporary ending. Can you talk about kind of the directorial decision to extend the ending and kind of answer some of those questions?
Sure. I think before I answer that, I actually have to kind of go back and talk about my vision for the overall production, because that's what led to me kind of creating this little epilogue that I tacked on to the end. I will say historically, Isabella is this. If you're not familiar with the show, I guess this is a spoiler. The Duke proposes to Isabella, and in the actual text, the original text, and in this production, Isabella does not speak. She doesn't. There is no verbal answer, and I knew, based on what I wanted to do with this production, that I needed it. There needed to be something around that moment. So I created the epilogue. Okay, so now I'm going to go back, if it's okay, and talk
Absolutely.
about the vision that I had for this show. And when I was asked to direct this show, I was a little hesitant because I was in a production in 2015 and I played Isabella, and it's a hard journey to take, the one Isabella takes. And I thought, oh gosh, do I really want to go down that road again? But when Patrick approached me, I knew that he wanted this production to be through the lens of the Me Too movement. So I started thinking about the Me Too movement, how it resonates with me, not just as a woman, but as it turns out, as a mom. And what I came to realize is that while the Me Too movement has a great impact on me as a woman, it has an even greater impact for me, for my daughters, and the changes that I potentially see for them. So I looked at this play and thought, well, where are the kids? So I started to look and see, where can I put kids in this scenario? And let's say this is the world where the adults have all become complacent with this is just the way it is. Here comes Isabella, a young woman who kind of pushes back at the system, and the kids in this world see her and say, oh, maybe it doesn't have to be like this. So that was my jumping off point. So I went back and I looked at the script and I tried to figure out where I could put the kids. I decided the character of Pompey, who is originally a man, and really quite a lovely character. I feel like in a lot of ways Pompey is the heart of this play, because Pompey can and does kind of step back and look at the audience and say, do you see what they're doing here? Like, you know, he really speaks truth in the way that Shakespeare's other can. And so I thought, well, okay, I'll make the kids the other. So I took that role and I split it into 5 so that I can always have, and for almost the entire show, there are kids sprinkled out throughout the stage to remind us that even when we don't think they are, kids are watching and listening and then emulating, okay? So we see the kids in this show being fine with the things because they've become accustomed to it because they're following the adults' lead, right? So in order to kind of tie that up, once Isabella comes to that moment in the end, and she's so beaten down by everything that she's experienced throughout the course of the play that I'm not sure she knows how to respond. It's then the kids who come up and the kids who say to the adults in the epilogue that I wrote, "What are you doing? Hold on. Because I don't think it has to be this way for me." But part of changing that is you taking a look at your actions and deciding to change. So that's what the epilogue is for me.
And you talked about conceptualizing this show through the lens of the Me Too movement. What do you hope that the impact is going to have on women, on the audience, even on maybe young women coming to see the show?
Well, I really tried to keep it in mind without being too in your face about it, I guess.
Too preachy?
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks. And ultimately, you know, what I've tried to do here with this production is, I think it sounds kind of presumptuous to say educate the audience, but at least show the audience that there is a wide range of behaviors that are hurtful to women. I decided to put in one moment of the show where one of the male characters tells one of the other women to smile. And I looked at my AD, Lucinda, and during rehearsal one night, and I said, "How would Shakespeare tell a woman to smile?" And Lucinda was like, and she started looking and researching stuff, and she came up with this wonderful line, "Dimple thy cheek," which I just think is wonderful, right? So we have a character in the play who says to a woman, "Dimple thy cheek," you know, and so it's moments like that up to an assault. You know, we have that whole range in this show because I wanted to show the audience that it doesn't have to be a full-out rape to cause damage, or to that even something like telling a woman to smile creates ripples that affects the community at large. And even stuff like that, we need to be aware of the impact that it has.
Well, and it is striking that this play was written over 400 years ago,
Right.
and yet, and I guess it shouldn't be striking or surprising, but the demeaning behavior that he's writing about is exactly the behavior making headlines.
Yeah, it's a real shame.
We are sitting on the set, as I mentioned, and I want to talk about some of the design decisions because they're interesting and bold, and they kind of, at least for me as an audience member, made the play really relevant and visually interesting. So let's talk about the graffiti wall behind you.
Okay.
It's marked up and erased throughout the production, and it becomes tremendously symbolic. And so we've got the graffiti wall on this side, we've got the prison and the government, which is really on a more traditionally designed set on the other side. So talk about kind of the design decision to really utilize a graffiti wall in the way that you have without giving too much away?
Well, in thinking about how the kids would live in this world, and knowing that the majority of the kids are not in the government side of the world, okay? I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if they were expressing themselves by writing on the walls? And that really sets apart the way they process things as kids, but as kids in their world. And the graffiti, I'll be honest, the graffiti was one of the last things that really came together with this production. I knew one of the young women who came and auditioned for me has a natural talent for drawing, and when I decided to cast her, it really became, oh, okay, so because I have this person in the cast who has this natural ability, I can move this from just writing words on the wall to having images on the wall. So she and I, you know, we talked together and ultimately came up with images for certain moments that really made an impact on us. And I think it's really fun to be able to use it in this way, where it's very fresh and organic in the production while things are going on. And anything else I say would probably be a spoiler. So.
Well, and a striking contrast to the graffiti, very contemporary graffiti set, are the period costumes,
Yes.
so beautifully designed by
Ketty
Shum,
Yeah.
who is the visiting artist in residence for
Yes.
Wake County United Arts Council. One question that my colleague Kim Jackson had was, Isabella wants to be a nun, and yet she's dressed in period costumes, but not a postulant outfit. So
Right.
what was the decision kind of behind putting Isabella in regular clothes for the time?
Sure. So when I came to the design team, I and maybe every director gets this, when people ask me, or when people learn, oh, you're directing measure for measure, well, what time period are you putting it in? And I thought, I don't know. And as I started thinking about it, I was thinking, it doesn't feel right to me to put this in any one time period, because this is not an issue that is exclusive to any one time period. So I would like to put it in all time periods. And that's what I took to my design team, okay? I said, the sets, the props, the costumes, this is what I'd like to convey, okay? In my mind, it was literally like all time periods, but I'm not a designer. So they kind of scaled that back, right? And they're like, okay, we'll do it during this span. So there was a lot of thought that went into the journey for each character, and then the time period that they were set in, costume-wise. And then the props tried to match that as much as possible. And so the decision to not put Isabella in a nun's habit comes from the fact that she's not yet an actual nun. So like in the scene where she's talking about the privileges that the nuns have, the actual nun, Francesca says, you're not yet bound by these rules, so you can talk to that man, I can't. You know, so we know, it's established pretty early on that Isabella she's not there yet, right? And So I was totally okay with her not being in a nun's habit. I don't know exactly why that period was chosen. You'd have to talk to Ketty about that, because I was like, yeah, that looks great. I don't know. But that's kind of what we were going for with the costumes. And I think it's quite lovely. I think there are productions where she is, I was in a nun's habit when I performed in it. But I've seen both, so.
RLT enlisted the help of an intimacy director, which is something, it's probably not something new, but it feels like it's kind of a new concept in theater and probably in film and across all media, based on what we've seen, how actresses are treated, the nightmare stories we're hearing. What is the role of an intimacy director, and how did she really play a part in this production? Why did you feel it was necessary? Having seen the show, I understand why it was necessary to have an intimacy director here, but what was her role in doing this, and why was it important to enlist the support of one?
Well, I think last summer became aware of intimacy direction as a thing, right? And when I agreed to direct, I had a feeling, even though it wasn't completely mapped out in my head, I had a feeling that what I needed to do with this show was push some boundaries. And I feel like knowing that very early on, I knew I didn't want to push those boundaries with my actors, or I didn't want to push those boundaries with my characters and create any damage in doing so to my actors. So it felt like, even not knowing exactly what it was going to look like as a finished product, it was the responsible thing for me to do, to take care of my cast by having someone come in and make sure that we were doing it safely, whatever it was that we decided to do. Because of this experience now, I feel like in any show that has intimacy in it, whether that is a kiss or something,
bigger,
more extreme than that, sure. It is really important for the safety of everyone to enlist that assistance from an intimacy director. I feel like fight choreography is crucial for physical safety. We don't just put a fake sword in someone's hand and say, go figure it out. And as a result of this experience, this production, I feel like intimacy choreography is crucial for emotional safety.
Do you feel like, having enlisted the help of an intimacy choreographer, that it allowed you to push the boundaries even more because you were doing it in a safe environment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because intimacy choreography is the same as fight choreography in that this sequence, if you will, is broken down into step-by-step moments. And when you break it down that much, and you talk about each movement and the placement, and someone has the agency to say, no, I'm not comfortable with your hand being here, let's put it here, I'm more comfortable with that. Then that actor can be comfortable, both of those actors can be comfortable knowing that there's no, emotional stuff going on, that they're safe in the moments. And then, and because of that safety, they can actually allow themselves to go further emotionally, because they know without a doubt they're physically safe, because they're checking in with each other, they're checking in with us, and it's huge. It's a real big deal, and it really does need to be talked about a lot until it's everywhere and everyone knows about it.
Why do you think, I mean, like we said, this is a 400-year-old play, but why do you think it's an important story to tell right now?
Well, I think because we don't, until recently, the conversation surrounding these issues was hesitant, and we were complacent, and I say that as a woman who has been a victim. It's just not easy to talk about. And so what I was planning to do with my daughters, which teach them, talk to them about how these things are and how they can try to handle these things without being compromised, right? Because of the Me Too movement, I talk to them differently now. I never thought about talking to them about consent. And that feels right now like a failing to me, but, curtains have been opened, I think, for a lot of us. And it's just like my mom didn't feel comfortable talking to me about these things. Her mom didn't feel comfortable talking to her about these things. Like, it's a cycle, right? So I think the Me Too movement has shown us that collectively we can come together and break the cycle. And that's a big theme in this play too. That's what I was trying to get across, like with the kids, and the kids watching this cycle, and then at the end standing up and saying, can we break this? Because that's how I feel. And I'll be honest, I've forgotten the question.
Why do you think it, and I think you answered the question, why it's an important story, why it's an important play to do right now, to tell,
Sure.
Why it's an important story to tell right now.
Yeah, I mean, my key, like my main hope for this production, and theaters all across the country are putting this in their seasons, right? I think the idea for me, and my main concern, whether you like the play or not, is to keep the conversation going. Because if we keep the conversation going, then we don't sit back and become complacent.